My name is Camille Harrington. I'm 29 years old, and last month I stood outside Grace Memorial Chapel in Charleston, South Carolina, watching through glass doors as they lowered my father's casket into the ground without me. The woman who made that happen? Lorraine Harrington, my stepmother. She looked stunning, as always. Perfectly pressed black dress, dark sunglasses, not a single tear as she clutched the folded flag from the honorary guard with shaking hands. Hands that, for all I know, helped my father to an early grave. I wasn't allowed inside. She said I wasn't listed in the funeral arrangements. My name wasn't in the program. And when I tried to enter, her brother, Calvin, blocked the door and said, "Immediate family only. You're not welcome here, Camille." I stood there, humiliated, heartbroken, and furious, my palms trembling as I clutched the strap of my shoulder bag. They had no idea what was inside that bag, and they certainly had no idea what my father had entrusted to me months before he died. But to understand how we got here, you have to know what kind of man my father was. Richard Harrington built his empire from nothing. He started as a junior property agent, pounding the pavement in old downtown Charleston. By the time I was born, he was a household name across the Carolinas, a real estate developer known for transforming crumbling landmarks into vibrant community centers and revitalized neighborhoods. But to me, he was just Dad, my compass, my anchor, my safe harbor. After my mother, Elizabeth, died of breast cancer when I was 16, it was just the two of us. He gave me space to grieve but never let me feel alone. Every Sunday, we had brunch at his favorite place, the Riverstone Cafe on East Bay Street. Cinnamon coffee, eggs Benedict, and long conversations that covered everything from college admissions to whether I should dump my first boyfriend. "Always trust your instincts, Camille," he'd say, tapping his coffee mug against mine. "You've got your mother's intuition. Use it." And I did, even when it hurt. Especially when he met Lorraine. She swept into our lives like a tidal wave when I was 19. Dad met her at a fundraiser for the Historical Preservation Society. She was graceful, polished, and 10 years younger than him. "Widowed," she said. 2 children, Chase and Brielle, both teenagers. I was happy he was smiling again after years of sorrow. I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. But from the beginning, things felt off. Lorraine laughed too loudly at his jokes. Her children made themselves comfortable in our home a little too quickly, and I'll never forget the way Chase's eyes darted around our living room, lingering on the antique clock, the art collection, the silver-framed photos of my mother. Still, I tried. I invited Brielle out for coffee, helped Chase review colleges. I even stood beside Dad at their wedding just 6 months after they met, smiling through clenched teeth as Lorraine recited vows about honesty and loyalty that made my stomach twist. I wanted Dad to be happy. That's all I ever wanted. But things changed. Fast. Photos of Mom began disappearing from the walls, replaced by sleek modern art Lorraine thought would brighten the space. The vintage heirlooms, gone. Locked in storage. She redecorated the house until it looked like a high-end hotel. Cold. Impersonal. Nothing of my mother remained. The brunches? They stopped. First came excuses. "We're hosting the Petermans this weekend." Or, "Brielle has a violin recital." Then came the emergencies. Lorraine calling mid-brunch, claiming the water heater had burst or Chase had locked himself out of the house. Every moment she could, she interrupted our time, and Dad, he didn't fight it. He just wilted. Lorraine inserted herself into every part of his life, his calendar, his medication, his friendships, his business contacts. One by one, the people who mattered began to vanish from his orbit, including me. When I graduated from Clemson, he offered to pay for everything: my apartment, my grad school, a car. I thanked him and politely declined. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. He smiled and said, "You're just like your mother, stubborn and proud. I love that." I moved to Atlanta for work, but we talked almost daily. Every few months I came home to visit, and each time I noticed something new. He was thinner, quieter, less sharp. Lorraine always brushed off my concerns. "He's just aging, Camille. You're imagining things." Then, on one visit last summer, Dad pulled me aside while Lorraine was in the kitchen. "I've made some changes," he whispered, his hand gripping mine. "If anything ever happens, talk to Linda at the office. She'll know." That was the last time I spoke to him without someone listening in. 3 months later, I got the call. From Chase, of all people. "Mom said to tell you, he's in the hospital." He didn't even say my father's name. Just he. I flew out that night, heart pounding, suitcase barely zipped. I arrived at Charleston General at dawn. The 4th floor, cardiac ICU. I rushed to the desk and said, "Richard Harrington, I'm his daughter." The nurse hesitated. "I was told his children were already here." I turned around, and there they were. Lorraine, Chase, Brielle, perfectly groomed, perfectly composed. I stepped toward them, but Lorraine cut me off. "Camille, this is a sensitive time. We don't want to upset Richard." "I'm his daughter," I said, voice shaking. "I want to see him." Her lips curled into that signature smirk. He made it very clear. No visitors outside his household. I'm his wife. These are his children now. It was like a knife to the heart. I tried the nurses, the doctors, the administrator. Nothing worked. 3 days later, he died. No goodbye, no final word. Just a voicemail from Brielle. "He passed this morning. The funeral's Friday." I wasn't even told the time or place. I had to find it myself. And when I arrived, they turned me away. But what Lorraine didn't know, what none of them knew, is that 3 days after my father's death, his longtime assistant showed up at my hotel room, and what she handed me would change everything. After they lowered my father's casket without me, I sat alone in a hotel room just a few miles from the home I grew up in, staring out at the Charleston harbor, paralyzed by a mix of anger, grief, and disbelief. I kept replaying the last real conversation I had with him. "If anything happens to me," he had said, "talk to Linda at the office. She has something for you." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was just Dad being overly cautious, maybe sentimental. But now it felt like a coded warning. For the next few days, I stayed at the Hampton Inn near East Bay. I couldn't bring myself to go back to Atlanta yet. The idea of returning to my normal life while everything I had known felt like it had been ripped away made me sick. I took bereavement leave from work, but all I did was lie on the bed with the curtains drawn, wondering how my father, my dad, could have left everything to Lorraine and her kids. Then, on the 3rd night after the funeral, there was a knock on my hotel room door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart jumped. What if it was one of Lorraine's people here to intimidate me? I opened the door cautiously. There stood Linda Carpenter, my father's executive assistant of 18 years, in a long trench coat, sunglasses tucked into her collar, clutching a large leather purse to her chest like it held something radioactive. "Linda," I whispered. "May I come in?" she said quickly, glancing nervously down the hallway. "I can't be seen here." I stepped aside and she entered, shutting the door quietly behind her. "I don't have much time," she said. "Patricia's been at the office almost every day since your father passed. She's already fired 2 senior staff. But before things got out of hand, I followed his instructions." From her purse, she pulled out a manila envelope sealed with red wax. The Harrington family crest was stamped into the center. Dad's personal ring signature. "He gave this to me 6 months ago," she said. told me to deliver it only to you, in person. No messengers, no emails. My hands shook as I took the envelope. He said you'd know what to do, she added, then checked her watch. I need to go. I wanted to ask her more, but she was out the door before I could even offer her tea. The envelope was heavier than it looked. I placed it on the desk, sat down, and stared at it for 10 long minutes. Then I broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. A handwritten letter from my father on his personal stationery. A sealed legal document bearing the logo of Charleston Equity and Trust, a law firm I'd never heard of, and a small brass key taped to a white card with a bank address and a box number, First Palmetto Bank, Safety Deposit Box 42. I unfolded the letter and immediately recognized his looping script. My dearest Camille, if you're reading this, it means my worst fears have come to pass. I'm sorry I didn't do more sooner. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Over the past year, I've watched Lorraine manipulate, isolate, and control. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But when I found financial irregularities, missing prescriptions, and surveillance photos, I knew I wasn't. I changed my will 6 months ago. The one with Harrison and King is no longer valid. The enclosed document reflects my true wishes. The key will lead you to evidence I've compiled. You'll understand everything soon. I may not be around to fight for you in person, but I hope this is enough to protect you and the values your mother and I believed in. You are my legacy. I love you more than you'll ever know. Dad, I couldn't breathe. I clutched the letter to my chest, crying harder than I had since he died. It wasn't just grief. It was relief. I knew something had been wrong. I felt it in my bones. And now I had proof that Dad saw it too. The next morning, I dressed in neutral tones, tied my hair back, and took a taxi to First Palmetto Bank. I showed the clerk my ID and the key. After a few calls and signature verifications, the branch manager led me to the basement vault. He handed me a sleek steel box the length of a loaf of bread and left me in the viewing room. Inside, I found a second letter, this one more detailed, laying out a timeline of Lorraine's behavior and his observations. Printed photos, Lorraine entering hotels with a man identified as her ex-husband, James. Another showing James alone entering our family home while Dad was away on business. Financial records showing wire transfers from my father's accounts to an offshore account under James's name. Several of my dad's medical charts with notes in his handwriting, questioning prescription changes. A thumb drive labeled Office Audio Logs. And that was just the beginning. One audio file made my stomach turn. Lorraine's voice. He's still lucid. I told you, we need to increase the blue ones before the weekend. They make him docile. James. If you keep pushing, someone's going to notice. Lorraine. Camille's coming next month. I just need to keep her away long enough for the paperwork to finalize. I dropped the drive onto the table, my hands shaking. Every instinct I'd suppressed, the unease, the doubt, the dread, was now screaming. My father hadn't just been manipulated. He had been isolated, medicated, possibly poisoned, and the people responsible were smiling through his funeral. I sat in that bank room for another hour, cataloging everything and snapping digital copies. I repacked the evidence in my bag and walked out of the bank into the heavy Charleston humidity. By the time I returned to my hotel, I had made my decision. I didn't care what Lorraine thought. I didn't care that I wasn't invited. I was going to be at that will reading, and I wasn't coming empty-handed. The morning of the will reading, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room and adjusted the neckline of my slate blue blouse. Not black. I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to fight. Everything I needed was tucked inside my leather bag. The original copy of my father's new will, sealed and notarized. The photos of Lorraine with her ex-husband, James. The medical records he had annotated himself. the timeline he built, and the thumb drive full of audio recordings, including the one where Lorraine instructed someone to give him the blue pills that made him sleepy. I took a deep breath and whispered to my reflection, "Let's go finish what Dad started." The law office was tucked away in a restored antebellum building off Meeting Street, discreet and polished. Preston and Locke LLP, a firm Lorraine had selected, no doubt for its discretion and its deference to high society clients. I wasn't invited. But that didn't stop me. When I stepped through the double glass doors, the receptionist looked up with surprise. "I'm here for the Harrington estate reading," I said evenly. She hesitated. "May I have your name?" "Camille Harrington, daughter of Richard Harrington." She typed something quickly, then looked up, eyes cautious. "You're not listed. I was told only immediate family." "I am immediate family," I said, dropping my voice just enough to make her shift in her chair. A moment later, a tall, square-jawed man emerged from the hallway. I recognized him immediately from my research. Graham Preston, estate attorney and executor for the will Lorraine had planned to use. He didn't even try to hide his irritation. "Miss Harrington, this is highly irregular. The meeting has already started." "Then you'd better catch me up quickly," I said, stepping past him. "I believe my father has a few things left to say." He held the door, probably weighing whether to call security or let me through. He let me in. The conference room was sleek and silent. Lorraine sat at the head of the polished mahogany table in a fitted black dress, flanked by her children, Chase and Brielle. Her brother Calvin was there too, along with her personal attorney, Mitchell Warren. All eyes turned to me. Lorraine's face froze into a practiced smile. Tight, brittle, insincere. "Well, I see the estranged daughter decided to make an appearance," she said without turning her head. "Good to see you too, Lorraine," I replied, sliding into an empty chair near the far end of the table. Chase looked down. Brielle rolled her eyes. Graham cleared his throat. "Let's proceed." He began reading the document Lorraine had submitted. The old will. According to it, everything was to go to Lorraine. The estate, the company shares, the beach house in Folly Beach, the condo in Kiawah, the vintage sailboat. Chase and Brielle were named secondary beneficiaries. "And nothing for me?" I asked softly. Graham blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "There are no provisions for Miss Harrington in this version of the will." Lorraine leaned back in her chair with theatrical pity. "It's what your father wanted, Camille. He told me he didn't want you burdened with all the responsibilities. He thought you'd prefer your independence." I smiled. Slowly, coldly. "You're right. He did want me to be independent. That's why he sent me to First Palmetto Bank." Lorraine's eyes twitched. "What?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a crisp sealed envelope with a navy blue embossed logo. Charleston, Equity and Trust. I handed it to Graham. "This is my father's actual final will, dated 6 months ago, witnessed and notarized, and filed directly with the state. It supersedes the one you're reading." The silence that followed was deafening. Lorraine's voice cracked. "That's impossible. He never mentioned any changes." "Of course not," I said, "because he didn't trust you anymore." Graham carefully broke the seal and began to read. I watched the blood drain from Lorraine's face. The new will changed everything. She and her children were granted modest lifetime trusts, just enough to live comfortably, but with no access to the principal. The family home was to be liquidated, with the proceeds allocated to a new nonprofit foundation in my mother's name, the Elizabeth Grace Fund. Control of Harrington Properties, my father's development firm, and the bulk of his remaining assets left to me. Every cent, every vote, every decision. As Graham read aloud the clause about revoking all previous wills and codicils, Lorraine rose from her chair. "This is a forgery," she snapped, her composure unraveling. Richard never would have done this, not without telling me. Graham flipped to the last page. The signatures are real. Witnesses are listed. This was filed directly with the probate office and assigned a file number. If you wish to contest it, we'll need to go to court. Lorraine's eyes darted to her lawyer. He was already sweating. And one more thing, I added. There's a clause at the end. Graham's voice was somber as he read it. In the event of my death under circumstances that may be deemed suspicious or premature, I direct the executor of this will to authorize a full investigation, including toxicology reports and a review of all medications, prescriptions, and medical treatment received within the 6 months prior to my passing. Lorraine dropped into her chair like the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She knew. She knew Dad had seen through her. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her water glass. Chase leaned away from her slightly. Brielle blinked in disbelief. Graham closed the file slowly. We will need to validate this will through proper proceedings, but if it holds up, which it appears likely to, then Miss Harrington will be named executor. Lorraine stood again, this time with fire in her eyes. This isn't over, she hissed. I stood too. No, Lorraine, it's just beginning. After I left the law office that day, the heat outside felt different. Less like summer in Charleston and more like pressure on a kettle that was about to blow. By the time I reached the hotel, my phone had already buzzed 3 times with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I finally answered one, Lorraine's voice pierced through like a blade. You conniving little vulture, she snapped. How dare you ambush me like that? I didn't ambush anyone, I said calmly. I just honored Dad's wishes. Something you clearly weren't prepared for. I was his wife, she yelled. I loved him. Unlike you, hiding in another city while he wasted away. And then she hung up. No warning, no goodbye, just venom. The next 24 hours were chaos. I received over a dozen messages, some threatening, some tearful, some just incoherent rambling, from unknown numbers. Lorraine's brother Calvin sent a voicemail that chilled me more than anything. Back off, Camille, he growled. You don't want to find out how ugly this can get. I saved every single message. I made backups, printed transcripts, stored copies on cloud drives and hard drives, and even mailed one to my attorney friend back in Atlanta. I was done being intimidated. The next morning, I met with Caroline Westfield, a probate attorney who specialized in contested wills and elder abuse. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had been quietly recommended to me by one of my father's oldest business associates. After reviewing the documents, Carolyn looked up and said one sentence that made my pulse race. Your father was very, very smart. She flipped through the sealed will, the bank records, the audio recordings, and the private photos of Lorraine with her still legally married ex-husband, James. By creating this updated will through an independent firm and registering it directly with the probate court, he made it almost impossible for the previous one to override it. Caroline didn't sugarcoat things. Lorraine could still contest the new will, but she would have to prove Dad was mentally incompetent when he signed it or that he was under duress. And, Caroline added, with these medical records and the clause about a full investigation, she might want to tread lightly. We filed an emergency motion that afternoon to freeze the estate assets and temporarily block Lorraine from liquidating or transferring any holdings. That included the main Harrington residence, Dad's shares in the company, and several art pieces Lorraine had already tried to remove from the home. Meanwhile, Lorraine went on the offensive. She launched a PR campaign, not in the media, but in the tight-knit Charleston social circle. She called Dad's golf buddies, neighbors, even the director of the Preservation Society, spinning a tale that I had swooped in from Atlanta after abandoning my father and manipulated him during his final months. She's always been resentful, she reportedly told one of his friends at a gala. She couldn't stand that Richard found happiness again. I started getting side eyes from people around town. One woman at a cafe actually hissed "gold digger" under her breath as she passed. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't hurt so much. But I stayed focused, because the cracks were forming. Fast. 2 nights later, I received a message from a blocked number. Just one line. "We need to talk." Not with her. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Battery Park. It was signed, Chase. I debated for hours. It could be a setup, but it could also be real. The next morning, I arrived early. Chase was already sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, wearing sunglasses and looking nothing like the smug, cold teen I remembered. "I don't know what's true anymore," he said as I approached. "She's falling apart." He told me Lorraine had been drinking heavily, locking herself in the office for hours and shredding documents in the middle of the night. He'd found a bag of prescription bottles in her closet, ones with my father's name partially scratched out. "Why would she have his meds?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You know why," I said gently. Chase nodded. "I don't want to believe it, but I also can't ignore it." He hesitated. "There's something else. There was a night, weeks before he died. She told me to give him a blue pill, said it would help him sleep while she ran to the store. I thought it was harmless. But then I saw him the next morning, slurring, confused. He didn't even recognize me for a minute. A cold wave rolled down my spine. "Will you tell the police?" I asked. I don't know, but I won't lie for her. If it comes to it, I'll tell the truth." That night, I changed hotels and moved under an alias. Caroline had advised it, just in case. The voicemail threats had escalated, and we weren't taking chances. The following day, I received another message, this time from Brielle. She wanted to meet, and this meeting would change everything. I met Brielle at a quiet tea house in Mount Pleasant, one of those sun-drenched spots with ivy crawling up the brick and soft jazz humming from hidden speakers. She looked different from the polished, pearl-clutching girl I remembered. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes were rimmed red. She kept checking over her shoulder. "Thank you for coming," she said quickly, sliding into a booth. I don't know who else to talk to." "What's going on?" I asked gently, though my pulse quickened. Brielle fiddled with her teacup. "Is it true? About the will? About everything?" "Yes," I said. "Dad changed it 6 months ago. He left you and Chase a trust fund. But Lorraine? She only got what he thought she deserved." Brielle blinked rapidly. "She promised me the Folly Beach house, said I could redecorate it once Richard was gone." She paused, then looked horrified at her own words. "I didn't mean it like that. I thought she meant after he retired. Not—" Her voice trailed off. "When did she start making those promises?" I asked softly. "About a year ago," she said. "She kept saying, 'Once Richard's gone, we'll finally live like we're supposed to.'" I didn't question it. I didn't want to. That phrase, "once Richard's gone," echoed through my mind like a bell tolling. Then she leaned forward. "There's something you should know. She's not who she says she is. I didn't realize until recently, but I did some digging." She hesitated. "I found her first husband's obituary. She said he abandoned her, but he died. Just like Richard. Sudden heart failure. No autopsy." I sat back, chilled. "Are you saying she—" "I don't know," she interrupted. "But 2 wealthy husbands dying unexpectedly? It's not nothing." We parted after an hour. I could tell she felt both ashamed and relieved. Brielle had grown up in Lorraine's shadow. Spoiled, yes, but also used, manipulated, controlled. And now she was unraveling a reality too twisted to ignore. That night, I finally handed over the thumb drive to Detective Liam Connolly, the officer who'd been assigned after we filed to freeze the estate. "I know this sounds dramatic," I said as he plugged it into his laptop, "but I think she may have drugged him. Slowly. Over time." Connolly listened to one of the audio files, the same one I'd replayed dozens of times. "Make sure he takes the blue ones first. They make him sleepy. Then give him the rest." He looked up. "That's your stepmother's voice?" "Yes." "And the man replying is her not ex-husband, James Whitlow. They were never divorced." He leaned back, exhaling. "You might be sitting on a conspiracy charge, maybe even involuntary manslaughter." And then something shifted. Because for the first time since Dad died, it wasn't just my word versus Lorraine's, it was evidence. That weekend, I attended a charity event my father had supported for over a decade. I wanted to show my face, not as the woman Lorraine had painted in her rumors, but as my father's daughter, his only daughter. And of course, Lorraine showed up. Uninvited, unhinged. She marched straight into the ballroom in a red silk dress, wine glass in hand, and pointed a shaking finger at me in front of half of Charleston society. "There she is," she screeched. "The leech, the one who slithered in and stole everything." Security was on her in seconds, but not before she shoved an hors d'oeuvre tray onto the floor and tried to slap a member of the board. The next morning, her photo was in the local paper with the headline, "Widows Outburst Mars Harrington Foundation Gala." And that was it. The police acted. Lorraine was served with a temporary restraining order. She was ordered to vacate the Harrington estate within 48 hours. When officers arrived to escort her out, she allegedly screamed, "You can't do this! He was mine!" Inside, they found a bonfire pit in the garden filled with half-burnt files, pill bottles, and insurance papers. The DA opened a formal investigation. The court date for the preliminary hearing on the will came fast. 3 weeks after the reading, I sat across from Lorraine in a Charleston courtroom. She looked rattled, pale. Her usually impeccable hair was frizzy, and her once perfect posture had curled inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. Caroline, my attorney, stood calmly as the judge entered. Judge Maria Langston, a seasoned, no-nonsense woman in her early 60s, eyed the room like she'd already seen too much of this kind of family drama. "Let's be clear," she said. "I will not tolerate games, threats, or stunts. We are here to determine the authenticity of Mr. Harrington's final will and to ensure his wishes are honored. Proceed." Lorraine's attorney began with a weak defense, claiming the newer will was forged and my father wasn't of sound mind. But then came Walter Gaines, my father's former attorney of 30 years, who'd been pushed out by Lorraine 6 months before Dad's death. He took the stand and, under oath, said, "Mr. Harrington told me plainly. He no longer trusted his wife. He feared she was manipulating his care. He requested a referral to a neutral estate attorney, and I made that referral." Then Caroline brought up Chase. Lorraine hissed at him to sit down, but he stood anyway. And for the first time in front of a judge, he told the truth. "I saw the pills," he said. "I heard her on the phone with a man she called James. She said, 'He's slowing down too fast. We need to pace it.' I didn't understand at the time. Now I think I do." Lorraine didn't speak after that. She didn't need to. The judge adjourned for only 15 minutes before returning with her ruling. The court recognizes the July 15th will as valid and enforceable. Camille Harrington is named the rightful executor of the estate. All prior documents are nullified. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation regarding possible elder abuse, fraud, and medical interference. Lorraine collapsed into her chair. I stood, straight-backed, silent, because Dad was right. She did try to erase me, but he made sure I had the truth, And that truth was about to burn through everything she'd built on lies. 2 days after the court ruling, Detective Liam Connolly knocked on my hotel door. I was still living out of suitcases, unsure if I'd ever feel safe enough to go home. He wore a badge around his neck and a new expression on his face, one I hadn't seen from him before. "Camille," he said, "we have results from the toxicology reports." I held my breath. There were elevated levels of dioxin, a medication your father wasn't prescribed. It builds up slowly, over time. The side effects match the symptoms he showed before his death: confusion, fatigue, cardiac irregularities. He paused. "There's enough here to open a full criminal case." And just like that, the last domino fell. Within days, Lorraine Winslow was arrested on multiple charges: elder abuse, fraud, obstruction of justice, and being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Her ex-husband, James Whitlow, was also taken into custody after investigators confirmed that they had never legally divorced. The separation had been a carefully staged lie to keep James close and undetectable. More evidence emerged from a fireproof lockbox discovered in a storage unit Lorraine rented under a fake name, letters she'd forged in Dad's handwriting, life insurance policy adjustments, a handwritten grief plan detailing what she'd wear to the funeral and who she would exclude. It was chilling. She had planned everything, but she didn't plan for my father to notice, and she definitely didn't plan for me to fight back. 6 months later, I moved back into the Harrington house, not because I wanted to cling to the past, but because I wanted to restore what Lorraine tried to destroy. Gone were the cold grays and abstract sculptures. I had the old furniture brought back from storage. Family photos went up again. My mother's antique dishes returned to the cabinet. And then, one afternoon, while reorganizing the study, I found a panel behind the bookshelf that I'd never seen before. Inside were a stack of tapes. Video diaries, recorded by my father. The last one was dated 2 months before he died. I popped it into a digital player and watched in silence. There he was. Thinner, yes, but clear-eyed. Present. "Camille, if you're watching this," then things unfolded the way I feared. "I want you to know. I saw it. I knew who she was becoming. But by the time I realized the depth of it, I was already fading. I tried to stop her the best I could. You were always my compass. You reminded me of your mother in all the best ways. Smart, kind, and never afraid to speak truth. Don't let her erase you. Don't let her twist what we built. The money, the company, it's not the real legacy. You are. What you do with it matters more than anything she ever pretended to value. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye properly, but I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Tears streamed down my face. Not from grief. This time, from peace. He knew. And in his own quiet, calculated way, he made sure I was never truly alone in this. The Elizabeth Grace Foundation opened its doors that fall, headquartered in the renovated sunroom of our family home. Its mission: to fund early cancer detection research and provide resources to children who've lost a parent, just like I had when Mom died. We've helped over 300 families in the past year. That, more than the inheritance, more than the company shares, is the legacy I'm most proud of. Mason and Brielle, despite everything, were given trust accounts to fund their education. It wasn't required by the will, but I knew it's what Dad would have wanted. Brielle enrolled in nursing school. Mason joined a construction apprenticeship program. They're trying to break the cycle Lorraine raised them in, and I'm cautiously rooting for them. I visit them once a month. Neutral ground, no cameras, no press. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet seat at a quiet table. Lorraine's trial was held 12 months after Dad's death. The courtroom was packed. She wore a beige suit, looked thinner, older, but the smugness was gone. Her attorney pleaded for leniency, citing emotional instability and a desperate attempt to preserve lifestyle expectations. The jury didn't buy it. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with no parole for the first 12. James received 10 years. His crimes were financial, but his silence cost lives. As the sentence was read, Lorraine stared straight ahead. She never looked at me. Not once. And I was fine with that. She'd already taken enough. Today, on the anniversary of my father's passing, I stood alone at his grave in Magnolia Cemetery. I placed a white rose, his favorite, beside the headstone. I kept my promise. I whispered, "Your story was told. Your wishes were honored. Your legacy continues." I stood for a while in the quiet, then turned to leave, stronger than I was a year ago. Wiser, not harder, just more whole. The journey from grief to justice taught me so much. That family isn't always about blood. That betrayal doesn't end you. It reveals you. That legacies are not measured in dollars, but in courage. If you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, if you've faced down lies, manipulation, and silence, I hope my story reminds you, you're not alone. Document everything. Trust your gut. And never underestimate the power of the truth, because sometimes the loudest justice comes from the quietest daughter.